referendum is not one that I have reached lightly. It is therefore important to set out why we have arrived at this point, and also, in light of the significant change facing our country, to reflect on the importance of giving the people of Scotland a democratic choice over our future. As a result of the Brexit vote, we know that change is now inevitable. The question is, what kind of change is right for Scotland, and should that be decided for us or by us? In the past 2 years or so, the Scottish Government has made a number of proposals designed to protect Scotland from the impact of Brexit. It's important to note that, had any one of these proposals been accepted by the UK Government, we would not be having this debate today. We recognised early on the risks to Scotland from the EU referendum, and so before the referendum even took place, we proposed that Brexit should be possible only if all 4 UK nations voted to leave. That sort of provision, relatively common in federal countries such as Australia and Canada, would in this context have recognised the reality of the UK as a multinational, not a unitary state. That proposal was rejected. As a result, although yes.
Would the First Minister recognise that the country is entirely divided down the middle, and that it is the job of the First Minister surely to heal those divisions rather than make them worse?
First Minister.
Well, I believe very strongly that where there is a difference of opinion about the best way forward, the best thing to do is to allow people to choose the best way forward. As a result of that proposal being rejected, although Scotland voted by 62% to 38% to stay within the European Union, we now face being taken out of the EU against our will, with massive implications for our economy, our society and our place in the world. Contrary to the promises made by the No campaign before the 2014 independence referendum, staying in the UK has not safeguarded Scotland's relationship with Europe, it has jeopardised it. Before last year's elections to this Parliament, the SNP's manifesto took account of that possibility. It said this: the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will. It is worth being clear. That manifesto commitment, combined with the result of the Scottish election, which returned a pro-independence majority to this Parliament, and then the outcome of the EU referendum, gives the Scottish Government an unquestionable democratic mandate for an independence referendum. And there is, and let me make some progress, I'll take an intervention shortly, there is an important point here for those who seek to question that mandate. To suggest that an emphatic election victory, on the basis of a clear manifesto commitment and a parliamentary majority on an issue, does not provide a mandate, begs the question, what does? And it runs the real risk of undermining the democratic process.
Lewis MacDonald.
I'm grateful to the First Minister, and I know that she will acknowledge that at that election she lost her overall parliamentary majority. It's an important point if we're talking about mandates to make that point. Can she tell us what assessment she has made of the view of the Scottish people and the appetite of the Scottish people for the kind of referendum that she proposed last Monday?
First Minister.
We won the election on the basis of that proposition, and of course the vote that will take place in this Parliament tomorrow evening will demonstrate very clearly whether or not there is a majority in this Parliament for that proposition. Notwithstanding the mandate that we have, I want to make some progress. Notwithstanding the clear mandate that we have, however, the Scottish Government did not seek a referendum on independence immediately after the EU vote. Instead, we tried to find common ground with the UK Government. I want to make some progress. We tried to... OK, I'll take an intervention.
Ruth Davidson.
On the point that the First Minister raises, can I ask her, were my ears deceiving me when I heard her within 3 hours of that vote being announced on the Friday morning, saying that she had already instructed civil servants and officials of the Scottish Government to draw up the necessary legislation for a second independence referendum?
First Minister.
I know that Ruth Davidson has a selective memory. She has, of course, forgotten that she said, following the referendum, that we should seek to stay in the single market. But if Ruth Davidson had listened carefully, what she would have also heard me say that day was that I was determined to explore alternative options to independence. What I sought to do was to find a way of allowing Scotland to stay in the UK while also protecting the most vital elements of our relationship with Europe. In other words, we tried to square the UK-wide vote to leave the EU with the Scottish vote to remain, and to give effect to how people in Scotland voted in both 2014 and 2016. We were encouraged in our endeavours by the initial comments of the Prime Minister, who made a commitment last July to seek agreement with the devolved administrations before triggering Article 50. So in the compromise paper we published in December, we argued firstly that the UK as a whole should stay inside the single market. That seemed the obvious consensus position in a state where 48% of voters and 2 out of 4 nations voted to stay in the EU. That would also have been in line with the clear commitment in the Conservatives' own manifesto. Not right now, I'm going to make some progress. Yet, despite this, the Prime Minister ruled out single market membership without any prior consultation with the devolved administrations, and that in itself was a breach of the commitment she made in July. However, the Scottish Government also proposed ways in which, with political will, the option of Scotland staying in the single market, even if the rest of the UK chose to leave, might be achieved. We also proposed significant new powers for this Parliament, short of independence, that would help protect Scotland's interests in the post-Brexit landscape. Powers that would effectively have delivered the federal solution that some in this chamber say they favour. However, all of these efforts at compromise, each and every one, have been rejected. Indeed, there has been no meaningful attempt whatsoever by the UK Government to explore these options and find common ground. Which brings me to where we are today. Having voted to remain in the EU, we face now being taken out against our will. And the probability is that our exit, taking us outside the single market, will be on harder and harsher terms than most people, including many Leave voters, would have supported in the run-up to last June's referendum. The voice of this Parliament has been ignored at every step of the way, and far from any indication of new powers, we now face the prospect of the UK Government using Brexit to reserve for itself powers in areas that are currently devolved to this Parliament. Now, all of this raises fundamental questions for Scotland. If the UK Government can ignore this Parliament on one of the most fundamental issues that the country faces, what meaning can ever be attached to the idea that the UK is a partnership of equals? If the UK refuses to guarantee the rights of EU citizens and focuses on ending free movement, despite the fact that growing our population is economically essential for Scotland, what does that mean for Scotland's desire to be an open, inclusive, welcoming society? And if the UK Government is determined to leave the single market, despite the wealth of evidence that doing so could permanently weaken our economy, risking jobs, investment and trade, what does that mean for our living standards and our future prosperity? And add to all of that the fact that, because of the collapse of the Labour Party, the current UK Government could now be in power until 2030 or beyond. Indeed. And it becomes clear that Scotland faces a fundamental question. It is a question not just of how we respond to Brexit, but about what sort of country we want Scotland to be. The answer to that question is surely one that should lie in our own hands. And that is the fundamental point at the heart of today's debate. As a country, we cannot avoid change, but we can choose what kind of change we want. Now, let me say quite clearly that I understand why many people do not relish the prospect of another referendum on a major issue within the space of a few years. That is something that weighs heavily on me, as I'm sure it does with others. However, the alternative to planning now to give Scotland a choice is this. It is simply to drift through the next 2 years, crossing our fingers, hoping for the best while fearing the worst, knowing that no matter how hard we work to avoid it, we may well have to accept a hard Brexit, come what may, no matter how damaging that turns out to be. It would mean accepting now that at the end of this process, we will not even have the option of choosing an alternative path, that the direction of our nation will be decided for us. I do not consider that to be right or fair. The future of Scotland should not be imposed upon us. It should be the choice of the people of Scotland. I've taken an intervention from you. I'll take one from Willie Rennie.
Ruth Davidson first.
The First Minister talks about the will.
Willie Rennie.
Oh, sorry.
Willie Rennie.
I don't know if that indicates any privilege. Alex Salmond, the First Minister's Foreign Affairs spokesman, said this morning that an independent Scotland would only seek membership of EFTA, not full membership of the European Union. How can the First Minister claim a mandate using the EU if she cannot even guarantee or even seek membership, full membership of the European Union?
First Minister.
The SNP's position in favour of membership of the EU is clear and it is long-standing. And what is beyond any doubt is that if we do not become independent, then that membership of the EU is ended because we are taken out against our will. I want to know I'm going to make some progress. I want to turn now, Presiding Officer, to the question of the timing of a referendum. As a matter of principle, the timing, together with decisions on franchise and subject to the advice of the Electoral Commission, the question should be for this Parliament to decide, just as it was in 2014. But that decision should be taken in the interests of the Scottish people having an informed choice, not driven by a consideration of what is convenient for any politician or party. The Prime Minister has said that now is not the time, and I agree with that. The choice must be informed. That means it should not happen before the terms of Brexit are known. In the speech she gave at Lancaster House in January, the Prime Minister said this, and I quote, "I want us to have reached an agreement on our future partnership by the time the two-year Article 50 process has concluded." If the Prime Minister is to deliver on that commitment, the terms of that agreement will require to be clear around 6 months in advance, autumn next year, to allow for the process of EU ratification. The European Commission has itself said that there will only be 18 months for negotiation. That has led to my view that the earliest time at which Scotland could make an informed choice would be the autumn of next year. However, it is also important that the choice is made while it is still possible, in a timely manner, to choose a different path. Therefore, it is also my judgment that the latest date for that choice— I'm going to make progress. I've taken lots of interventions. I'm going to make some progress. The latest date for that choice to be made should be around the time that the UK leaves the EU in the spring of 2019. That is the timeframe that I am asking Parliament to endorse today. But let me make this clear, Presiding Officer. If the UK Government disagrees with that timeframe, then they should set out a clear alternative and the rationale for it. And as I have said in recent days, I am, within reason, happy to have that discussion to see if we can find common ground that I can then propose to this Parliament. However, it will simply not be acceptable for the UK Government to stand as a roadblock to the democratically expressed will of this Parliament. It is, of course, I'm going to make some progress. It is, of course, entirely legitimate for the UK Government and for other parties in this chamber to robustly oppose independence. That is an honourable position, albeit one that I disagree with. However, in the circumstances we now face, for the UK Government to stand in the way of Scotland, even having a choice, would be, in my view, wrong, unfair and utterly unsustainable. Presiding Officer, no, I'm going to make some progress. Let me now turn to the nature of that choice. I have already acknowledged that it must be an informed choice. That means that the people of Scotland need to know the terms of Brexit and be in a position to make an assessment of the pros and cons before making that choice. And it also means that they need to understand the implications and opportunities of independence, whether on the economy, currency, Europe or the many other matters that people have questions about. Those of us who advocate independence have a responsibility to consider a range of issues in light of the changed circumstances brought about by Brexit, circumstances we did not choose to be in, and then present that information in a clear way. That is exactly what we will do, and we will do so in good time to allow scrutiny and debate well in advance of a referendum that is, at the earliest, 18 months away. And by doing so, we will allow people to make a genuinely informed choice between being taken down a hard Brexit path or becoming an independent country able to chart our own course. And that will be in stark contrast to the EU referendum. Not only was there no detail and no answers before that vote, that remains the case, shamefully so, 9 months after that vote. Presiding Officer, let me seek to end on a note of consensus. We might differ on the best way forward, but I suspect that almost all of us across the parties can agree that we would rather not be in this situation. The majority of us wish that the UK as a whole had chosen to remain in the EU. We wish that the UK Government was pursuing continued single market membership. But we cannot avoid or ignore the consequences of the UK-wide vote or of the UK Government's response to it. My determination at all times since the 23rd of June has been to stand up for Scotland's interests, and the support of this Parliament has been welcome. But 9 months on, there is no indication at all that this Parliament's voice has carried any weight at Westminster. Instead, the UK Government is taking decisions entirely unilaterally that I and many others believe will deeply damage our economy, our society and our standing in the world. Whether we like it or not, Scotland again faces a fundamental decision about what sort of country we want to be. The question before this chamber is simple. Who gets to make that decision? The answer to that question cannot be me, and it cannot be the Prime Minister. The decision about what kind of country we are and what path we take can only be made by the people of Scotland. It is for that reason that I ask members to support the motion before us today. I move the motion in my name.
I now call on Ruth Davidson to speak and move the motion in her name. Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, on Monday of last week, the First Minister announced her intention to demand a second referendum on independence. On Saturday of last week, the First Minister used her party conference speech to demand a second referendum on independence. And today we meet here to debate the SNP's demand for a second referendum on independence. And at least this last week has shown everybody what the #1 priority of this Scottish Government really is. It's separation, not education. This week, they've made clear what comes first. And, Presiding Officer, we've heard the First Minister speak today, and let me run through what she said about a second referendum in times past. In August 2014, a month before we voted on independence, we were told that constitutional referenda are a once-in-a-generation event, and I take it that she doesn't deny saying that. A few weeks later, at her party conference speech, she summoned up all her gravitas to tell her delegates that another referendum in this Parliament without a change of opinion would be wrong and we won't do it. A year ago this very week, she and I addressed a Federation of Small Business conference in Glasgow, where a businessman called Alan Robbie asked her why she was dragging us back to a referendum. And looking him in the eye, she promised him, if opinion stays as it was in the referendum, there won't be another referendum. She talks of outrage, and I wonder how outraged Mr Robbie is feeling today. Absolutely.
We'd just like to ask Ruth Davidson why she has omitted to quote the manifesto that I was elected as First Minister on last May.
Ruth Davidson.
Don't worry, First Minister, I'm getting to that. But what I will do is all through her speech, the First Minister was talking about the will of the people of Scotland. And let me read what our Premier Psephologist John Curtis has said. He says, each poll has asked a somewhat different question, but each has obtained much the same picture. Only just over a third say that there should be a second referendum, while around a half reckon there should not. The people of Scotland don't want this, and it won't wash to have a First Minister standing there, washing her hands, saying, "It's not me that's dragging us there, it's with a heavy heart, a big Tory did this and ran away." It won't do, First Minister. Take responsibility. And if all of those quotes that I gave you weren't enough, just for good measure, in the live TV debates that we all took part in April last year, watched by hundreds and thousands of Scotland's voters, the First Minister made herself clear. If support for independence doesn't increase, there won't be another referendum. Well, support hasn't increased. Indeed, according to the weekend's polls, the impact of the First Minister's big announcement last week has led to a drop in support for independence. But never mind, because if you're in the SNP, you don't need to acknowledge old promises, still less honour them. Instead, we are told today to forget about what was once said and instead submit to the SNP's will. Well, we don't, and we won't. So, Presiding Officer, let me set out the many reasons why my party will be opposing the government motion today. Because it calls on this Parliament to gain the power to call a referendum between the autumn of 2018 and the spring of 2019.
Order. Order.
Kenny, one day you'll make it to the front bench, but it won't be this week. The motion also insists that it is only this Parliament which should have the say over the franchise and the details of this referendum. And this bulldozer approach is completely at odds with the way in which the 2014 referendum was held. Back then, the SNP won a majority with a clear pledge to bring forward a referendum bill. The UK and the Scottish Governments worked together on proposals for a fair, legal and decisive referendum. The Edinburgh Agreement was then signed, with both sides promising to respect the result. And how different things are today, because under this First Minister, the SNP lost its majority with no clear pledge to hold the referendum. And I'm sorry, but believing something should happen if something else takes place might be many things, but it is not a clear mandate. And furthermore, the SNP wants to unilaterally decide on the rules and the timing of the referendum. And we now know that there is no agreement between the UK and the Scottish Governments on the prospect of this referendum. So I remind the SNP today that they once described the last referendum with the Edinburgh Agreement, with unanimous backing in this chamber, with 92% support across the public, as the gold standard approach. And this is not the gold standard. It's a tin pot approach to the biggest decision we could ever be asked to make. So let's cut to the chase. The SNP's plan last week weren't about trying to hold a fair, legal and decisive referendum. What it is really about is a very well-rehearsed game, which is to put forward an unworkable proposal, to wait for Westminster politicians to point that out, and then to rush to any nearby microphone with the angry face on and to trot out the same old tired complaints. Well, once upon a time it might even have worked, but it won't anymore, because most people in Scotland are sick to death of the games. Most people in Scotland don't want another referendum anytime soon, just 3 years after the last one. And most people in Scotland see the plain common sense in our own position, that Brexit is going to be a major challenge for this country. And none of us know how it will play out. None of us know how we will come through it, and none of us know what impact there will be for our country. Which is exactly why we question, how can we make a decision on our future constitutional path at a time of such uncertainty? Why start an independence referendum campaign now, at this very moment, when the process of leaving the EU is only just beginning? And why ask the people of Scotland to choose our future when they've not had the chance to see it playing out? And most of all, how can the SNP sit here today and demand another referendum when they still cannot answer the basic questions of their own proposition on currency, on long-term membership of the European Union, on the cost of independence? Another SNP conference has gone by. Another opportunity to answer even basic questions has been squandered. And in short, the First Minister wants a date, but she won't give Scotland a plan. So our position is as follows. There cannot be a referendum until people know what they're voting for, until the Brexit process is complete and they know both what the UK and what independence looks like. You don't make a decision on leaving the UK by voting blind. And we also believe that there should not be one when there is no political or public consent for it. Not when we were promised by this First Minister it wouldn't take place for a generation. Not when we were told that it wouldn't happen without a change of opinion. Not when we know it will cause more division and more uncertainty for our country. Now, I know that my plea will fall on deaf ears on the SNP benches, even amongst those who voted for Brexit and now see a sense in the pause. And apart from Alec Neil, they still haven't had the guts to stand up for their principle. But we know that the Scottish Greens are different. That's a party that claims to stand by its commitments. So we therefore call on them today to stick by their pledge to the people of Scotland. They said it should only come about by the will of the people. Well, there is none. They said it should not be driven by the calculations of party political advantage. Well, I'm afraid there's plenty of that. So I warn them today, dump the promises and push this over the line. And their position as the self-appointed moral guardians in this place will be no more. Now, I know absolutely be delighted to give way to the co-convener of the Green Party talking against his own manifesto pledge.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way, and I'm interested that she raises manifesto pledges. When I read in the Tory manifesto from 2015, on the very same page as the commitment to hold this reckless EU referendum, we are very clear about what we want from Europe. We say yes to the single market. Have I misunderstood the meaning of that apparently clear commitment?
Ruth Davidson.
The Prime Minister has already said that she wants UK firms, including Scottish ones, to be able to operate within and trade to the single market. And the whataboutery is fantastic. If a new referendum is to happen, it should come about by the will of the people and not be driven by calculations of party political advantage. Pin that to your front as you go through the voting booths, Patrick. Now, I know that all of the analysis and commentary surrounding today's debate has pointed to a predetermined result, and that there's little point in us all turning up because we all know how it's going to end, with the Greens dutifully backing the SNP as oft times before, and as Patrick has just admitted. But even in the Groundhog Day that is Scottish constitutional politics, I have a longer memory, to a time when parties across the constitutional divide united to act for the country. I remember in September of last year, when this Parliament voted for ministers to call in major NHS service changes, 6 months on, and no action by the Scottish Government. Also in September, the Parliament voted to ban fracking. Now, I didn't back it, but the votes were there for it in this chamber, and no action by the Scottish Government. In November, the Scottish Parliament voted to abolish the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act. 4 months on, no action by the Scottish Government. In January, this Parliament voted against SNP plans to scrap the Highlands and Islands Enterprise Board. No action by the Scottish Government. And just this month, the Parliament voted against SNP plans to abolish the Scottish Funding Council. 5 times in 6 months, the will of the Scottish Parliament has been clear, and 5 times in 6 months, this SNP government has chosen to ignore it. So if today the vote does go as all the commentators expect, I hope SNP members will reflect as they are crying grievance. Why do they exclaim that the Westminster Government should recognise votes in the Scottish Parliament when the Scottish Government does not do so? And to those Scots who are watching at home, will the SNP explain to them why votes on crucial issues such as health, as education funding, as enterprise, as energy should be wilfully ignored by the SNP government? But when it comes to independence, and only when it comes to independence, Holyrood is sacrosanct. Presiding Officer, this referendum may be this First Minister's priority, but it is not mine and it is not that of my party. And we say, let this Parliament focus on the issues that we were elected to deliver on better schools, on a sustainable NHS, on a growing economy, and on a strong Scotland as part of a strong United Kingdom. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Kezia Dugdale to speak to and move the amendment in her name. Kezia Dugdale.
Presiding Officer, I wish this was the start of a 2-day debate on education in Scotland, that we could focus on the need to close the attainment gap We could put forward proposals to give young people the best chance in life. We could come up with innovative ways to lift 260,000 Scottish children out of poverty. But instead we are back, talking about the only thing that has ever really mattered to the SNP. Nicola Sturgeon wakes up every single day thinking of ways to engineer another referendum, because leaving the UK is the only thing that matters to her. It isn't improving education in Scotland. It isn't living children out of poverty. It's independence. That will always come first. And the truth is, it always has. When the first majority Labour government established the NHS and the welfare state, the SNP wanted Scotland to leave the United Kingdom. When the last Labour government introduced groundbreaking anti-discrimination laws, maternity and paternity leave, the national minimum wage, tax credits, rights at work and civil partnerships, the SNP were arguing for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom. When the UK Labour government delivered a Scottish Parliament, the expressed will of the people following a referendum, the SNP still campaigned for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom. Brexit isn't the motivation for another referendum, it's just the latest excuse. Now, we have heard a lot from the First Minister about mandates, but people have noticed the shift in the SNP's language. They used to demand that the will of the Scottish people be respected, but the will of the Scottish people was very clearly expressed in 2014. 85% of our fellow citizens voted in the first referendum, and they voted by a very clear majority to remain in the United Kingdom. More than 2 million Scots, in the biggest mandate ever given to any political leaders in Scotland's history, voted to remain in the UK. That is the will of the Scottish people, and that is what should be respected. We have already heard from the First Minister about the need to respect the will of this Parliament. If only she'd respected the mandate given to government by this chamber before now. If she had, several local NHS services would be free from the threat of closure hanging above their head. The First Minister would have banned fracking, and she would have scrapped the Football Act too. This Parliament has had its say on Highlands and Islands Enterprise and the Scottish Funding Council. Will the First Minister respect that? And this Parliament voted to demand a change of course from the Nationalists on education. Given that's apparently her defining priority, surely the First Minister will respect that. So when this Parliament votes for another referendum, as it inevitably will, thanks to the perpetual crutch that the Greens provide, let's not pretend that it reflects the will of the Scottish people. Because it doesn't. The people of Scotland do not want another divisive referendum. Last week, the First Minister said the 2014 referendum wasn't divisive. She obviously didn't speak to many people beyond her own party faithful. Because my experience, and the experience of the very many Scots who have taken the time to tell me on the doorstep, in the street and by email, is that this country, their country, felt more divided than at any time in their lived memory. Families argued, colleagues fell out, and communities were split down the middle. No bus, no train, no pub, no community centre, no workplace, no living room escaped that fallout. And last Monday, the first day of this campaign, felt just as hostile and polarised as the 847th and final day of the last. Where does it end? Some of those who voted to leave the UK and the majority who voted to remain in the UK don't want to go back to the divisions of the past. But if there is to be another referendum, if the First Minister must drag the people of Scotland back there, the Labour Party will campaign with everything we have to remain in the United Kingdom. And let me tell you why. And let me tell you why.
For Scotland against this. Oh, come on.
Order.
Let me tell you why. First Minister, if you want to have a different result from the last time, you might want to listen to people that don't agree with you. I believe in the United Kingdom, not as a symbol of past glories or of purist ideology, but as a living, breathing union of nations that delivers for the people of Scotland. The pensioners whose income is secured through a UK state pension and benefit system. The shipyard workers who are in jobs because of UK defence contracts. The staff in East Kilbride who deliver aid to some of the poorest countries in the world on behalf of all of us. The schools that are built because of the extra money we receive by being in the UK. The NHS that we built together and is sustained because we pool and share our resources across the whole of Britain. The businesses, large and small, that are able to thrive because of access that they have to our UK single market. The scientists who carry out life-saving medical research because of funding from UK research councils. These are the things that I value the most. These are the things that being part of the United Kingdom has delivered for families across Scotland. So much prosperity and security. And at a time when so much of the world is ravaged by division, when the trend in too many places is separation, I value the fact that our four nations come together to share sovereignty and resources, that we recognise that together we're stronger, more so than we ever could be apart. And I say to the members opposite, it is not this union of nations which is intrinsically unjust or unfair. It is the actions of the powerful within it. Now, I hate what the Tories are doing to Britain. I've never felt anger like it. Wait and hear it. Listen. Listen. The austerity programme is destroying public services that we all value and the poorest rely on. But the SNP cannot escape from the facts. Leaving the UK would make things much worse for the poorest people in Scotland. And in the 6 years that I have sat in this chamber, I have never once heard a convincing argument to the contrary. Because separation would mean... Well, let's see if Kevin can give us one.
Kevin Stewart.
As Ms Dugdale has just mentioned poor folk there, as we see the Tories advance their austerity agenda and make poor folk even poorer, is she happy to go round doors saying that she's going to be happy with a Tory government for the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Kezia Dugdale.
The problem for Kevin Stewart and indeed the rest of the SNP members is that they want to replace Tory austerity with turbocharged austerity. Because the truth of the matter is, separation would mean £15 billion worth of cuts, £15,000 million worth of cuts to schools and hospitals. The government's own figures tell us that. It means cuts to pensions. John Swinney told us that. It means an end to UK defence contracts that keep thousands in work. Those are the facts. The Nationalists don't want to hear them. They will howl and they will rage. They will question the patriotism of those who back unity over division. But they cannot escape the reality. We are stronger, richer, fairer and a better nation by remaining in the United Kingdom. Tomorrow evening, Scottish Labour MSPs will vote against the divisive second independence referendum. That was our manifesto commitment to the people of Scotland, and we will honour it. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Patrick Harvey to speak to and move the amendment in his name.
Thank you. It's nice to be given such a warm welcome. I appreciate it very much. Presiding officer, if we are at the beginning of potentially 2 years of debate on the independence question again, I think it's important that we recognise the mixed feelings that exist. I'm sure I'm not the only member who's seen angry emails on both sides of the debate telling me that an independence referendum is an absolute priority or something that must be opposed absolutely. I've seen keyboard warriors on both sides. I've also spoken face-to-face to many people who remain as yet unconvinced or who have mixed feelings. But equally, we have to acknowledge that there are a great many people in Scotland who believe, whether reluctantly or with enthusiasm, that the future of Scotland has to be decided not by one parliament or the other, or by one government or the other, but by the people who live here. Now, before our political future was thrown into turmoil 9 months ago, most independence supporters I know understood that this was more likely to be again a long-term aspiration, and we're going to build that case over that long term, and that included my own party. And we suggested one means by which the issue could be revisited. But in assessing what the will of the people means, as so many people are keen to use that phrase, yes, we have to acknowledge that 2014 was an expression of the will of the people, but so was 2016, and the 62% who voted to remain inside the European Union. That is also an expression of the will of the people that must be respected.